I knew my marriage was ending before I knew why. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confession. It was a look, 1 second, maybe less, across a dinner table surrounded by people who loved us. Emily passed me the salad like she always did, but her eyes didn't land on mine. They passed through me. Not cold, not angry, just absent, like she'd already moved out and left her body behind to play hostess. Everyone else was laughing. My brother was mid-story, Emily was pouring wine, my niece spilled water, and I was sitting in the middle of it all realizing I didn't belong in the life I'd built. She smiled when I looked at her. That was the worst part. The smile still worked. The form was perfect, the timing right, but the warmth was gone. Like a photograph taken seconds after the subject walked away. For years, I'd read too much into things. I was that guy. The one who remembered facial expressions from arguments 3 months ago, who noticed if her tone shifted half a note. So I told myself to breathe, eat the lasagna, compliment the wine, be normal. But my appetite was gone. My hands stayed too still. I watched her laugh at my brother's joke and wondered if she even remembered I was there. That night, while brushing her teeth, she asked me if I'd remembered to renew the car insurance. I said yes. She nodded, rinsed, and walked out. No kiss, no touch. Just a checkmark on the evening. We went to bed like always. Her side, my side, the same worn silence. I stared at the ceiling long after she turned off her lamp, thinking about the way she hadn't looked at me. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye with lips that barely touched. She said, "Have a good one," and grabbed her keys. Her heels echoed down the hallway before the front door clicked shut. The sound stayed with me longer than it should have. Still, I told myself it was stress. She'd been working late. Her startup was finally getting momentum. She'd said as much at dinner. "Investors are circling," she told my sister. "It's about to get real." That night, we ordered takeout and watched a show we used to love. I made her laugh once, real laughter, and for a moment, I almost believed I'd imagined it all. But then she stood to get more wine, and I caught her reflection in the TV screen. She looked tired, but not the kind of tired that asks for help. The kind that comes after a decision's already been made. 2 days later, we were packing for a weekend visit to her aunt's. Nothing major, just a casual family thing. I mentioned pushing a call I had Monday morning to catch a later train back. She was checking her phone, not really listening. "I can't stay that late," she said. I asked why. "I've got coffee with an old coworker. He's in town for a couple days." I asked who. She paused just slightly. "Just someone from the agency. You wouldn't know him." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, without thinking, I said, "You sure you can't move it?" That's when she looked at me. Not with surprise. Not even irritation. Just stillness. Like something settled inside her in that moment, and she decided to show it. "I come first now," she said. Just that. I laughed. Reflex. The kind of laugh you give when a joke doesn't land, but you don't want it to be awkward. "Of course, Em. You always have." She didn't laugh back. She turned, zipped her overnight bag, and walked out of the room. Conversation over. It was a small moment. Practically invisible, if I hadn't been listening so closely. But I was. And for the first time in a long time, I heard her. She didn't mean she was prioritizing herself in some healthy, boundaries kind of way. This wasn't self-care. It was subtraction. She was cutting me out, not angrily, not dramatically, just methodically. That weekend was filled with smiles. We brought wine to her aunt, took photos in front of the hydrangeas, held hands in front of other people. But when we got home, she moved through the house like a guest. Her bag stayed half-packed. Her laptop never left her side. I remember standing in the hallway one night, watching her through the cracked office door as she typed, her face glowing in the screen's light. She used to ask me to help her name fonts. Now, I didn't even know what she was working on. She looked up once and caught me watching. She smiled. Perfectly. And I smiled back, pretending I didn't feel like I was watching the end of something we hadn't admitted had started dying. I didn't ask questions. I didn't make accusations. I just watched. And I remembered her words. "I come first now." I had no idea how true they'd turn out to be. The first charge didn't scream betrayal. It whispered. A quiet entry on our shared credit card statement. Rivali. $248.50. I had never heard of the place. A quick search showed it was a boutique steakhouse downtown. White tablecloths, candlelight, imported glassware. The kind of place you book for anniversaries or discreet negotiations. I hadn't been there. And I certainly hadn't charged it. Emily's explanation came easily, too easily. "Client dinner," she said, breezing past me with her gym bag slung over her shoulder. "The startup's trying to lock down a consulting firm. Carter insisted I handle the dinner since they requested a female lead." I nodded like it made sense. "Like I didn't notice," she said, Carter without explanation, as if I should already know. And maybe I did, somewhere in the back of my mind, some vague reference months ago, a LinkedIn profile I'd never thought to open. That night, I logged into the account, not because I didn't believe her, not exactly, more because something didn't sit right. The charge had posted on a Thursday, her so-called yoga night. The next charge was harder to ignore. Serenity Spa, $312. That was 3 days later. Another work expense? The line was thinner this time. She shrugged and said it was team building, then laughed about how awkward it was to wear a robe around coworkers. "Startup culture," she joked. I smiled. I even laughed. Then came the hotel. The Royalton, $438.72, listed under the same date as her overnight pitch deck retreat. I remember because I made her breakfast that morning, kissed her goodbye with a travel mug in her hand. She said she'd be pulling an all-nighter at Carter's apartment to finish their presentation. "No distractions," she said. "I'll probably crash on his couch. Don't wait up." I didn't. But I did write the charge down. That weekend, I went back 6 months. I combed through statements during the hours she was working late, or off-grid. I told myself I was being thorough, not suspicious. But suspicion had already moved in. It sat next to me at the kitchen table while I highlighted anything I couldn't remember, couldn't explain. Patterns formed. Personal expenses on weekdays, Ubers at strange hours, restaurant charges in pairs, 2 meals, never 3 or 4. Always on nights I remembered eating alone. But what caught me wasn't the spending. It was the deposits. Small ones spaced out. Not from her salary. These came from something labeled EMC Holdings, each under $1,000, just low enough to fly under any flag. I searched the name. Nothing obvious. No LLC registry hit. No address tied to us. Then came a separate account. One I didn't know existed. I found it by accident. Our bank app had updated, and her login autofilled under mine. I clicked before realizing what I was seeing. A business checking account under Ember Collective, LLC. Her name was the only one listed. I didn't mention it. Didn't ask. I just sat in my car outside our house with the screen glowing in my lap, watching the balance tick up every week, exactly in time with those unexplained deposits. That night, she curled up next to me on the couch and asked if I wanted to rewatch that crime drama we'd loved 2 winters ago. I nodded, handed her the remote. She leaned her head against my shoulder like nothing had changed. And maybe, for her, nothing had. But I couldn't unsee the numbers. I couldn't unfeel the distance. I told myself I needed more. Not for revenge. Not even for clarity. Just truth. If I was wrong, I wanted to be. God, I wanted to be. But I wasn't. Not really. I was just late. The problem with intuition is that once it wakes up, it doesn't sleep again. You start noticing things you would have missed before, things that, if you brought them up, would make you sound jealous or paranoid or, worse, insecure. So I didn't ask questions. I watched. It started with the flyer. I was refilling printer paper when I noticed something sticking out from the tray. Folded twice, printed on matte cardstock, Women in Innovation, Breaking Boundaries, Building Brands. Below the bold type, for keynote speakers were listed. Her name was second. Emily Warren, co-founder, Ember Collective. It was a company I wasn't supposed to know existed. She hadn't told me about the event. I would have remembered. She used to ask me to review her bios, tweak the phrasing. This one used a quote she told me once while we walked through Central Park, the kind of line I assumed was just between us. I put the flyer back exactly as I'd found it. Didn't move it an inch. The next breadcrumb came inside her car door. I'd taken it for inspection, a simple oil change. When I opened the driver's side to grab her sunglasses, a dry cleaning receipt fluttered to the floor. 3 items, a silk blouse, a navy blazer, and a men's tailored shirt, size 16.5. I sat in the driver's seat, receipt in hand, staring at the numbers like they'd explain themselves. When she came to pick it up, I handed her the keys without mentioning it. She smiled, thanked me, leaned in for a kiss. I let her. Back at home, while she took a conference call from the bedroom, I cleaned the kitchen. Not because it needed it, but because I needed a reason to linger near the trash. That's when I saw the envelope, recycled, folded into itself, addressed to Ember Collective, LLC, but sent to our home address. The return label read Franklin Bank, Business Services Division. Inside was a routing confirmation for a business line of credit, 6 figures, secured with initial partner capital, my capital, our accounts. The emotional part of me wanted to walk into the bedroom and throw it in her lap, ask her when lying had gotten so easy, but I didn't. Instead, I sat on the back deck, holding that envelope like a confession. I remembered the night she first mentioned starting something of her own. How we stayed up past midnight brainstorming names. How she cried, half from fear, half from hope. How I told her that if she ever built something, I'd be her first investor. I hadn't realized how literally she took that. The next morning, I checked her LinkedIn. Nothing new. Still listed as creative consultant. No mention of Ember, no mention of Carter, no press releases, no announcements. She wasn't hiding from the world, just from me. That weekend, she asked if I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party. I almost said no. Instead, I smiled and said, sure. I watched her get ready, apply her makeup in layers she used to ask me to critique. Her phone buzzed once, then twice. She turned it face down. At the party, she held my hand just enough to look convincing. When our friends asked about work, she deferred. Just the usual, she said. Pitching, late nights, chaos. I said nothing, just nodded. Because I wasn't ready to tip my hand. I wasn't building a case. I was building a timeline. She was creating something, yes. But not just a company. She was creating a new version of herself. One that didn't have space for me. I needed to know how far she'd gone, who she was building it with, and how long she thought she could hide it. Daniel Carter. That name had floated in and out of our conversations for over a year. Always on the periphery. She once mentioned him in the same breath as a former boss said he was brilliant but intense. Another time, she called him a mentor. I remember that word exactly because it was the only time she ever used it to describe someone outside her family. He was just a name until I started connecting the dots. A consistent deposit pattern on her Ember account. Same amount, same day, each month, traced back to a small firm called Red Oak Strategies. I looked them up. Boutique consulting, venture packaging, executive coaching. The kind of firm that builds companies and their founders' personas at the same time. Listed partner, Daniel Carter. She had said once over dinner, months ago, that Carter helped elevate her pitch deck. That he understood how investors think. I thought it was a one-off collaboration. Turns out, he was her co-builder. And from the frequency of deposits, and the scaling scope of Ember's presence, he wasn't just a consultant. He was in it, deep. I asked our friend Marissa, someone we both knew from Emily's old agency, how Ember was doing. Just a casual, offhand remark over brunch. Marissa blinked, hesitated. I thought you were part of Ember too, she said. It was like a stone dropped into a still lake. She tried to recover quickly. Something about assuming I had a background role, that she'd heard my name mentioned early on. I smiled. I kept it light. That same week, I visited Emily's office unannounced. Nothing dramatic. Just dropped by with coffee, an old habit from our early days, back when I'd surprise her before big presentations. The receptionist looked confused, said Emily wasn't in that day, then added, I thought she mostly worked out of the Ember loft now. I didn't correct her. I just left the coffee behind and walked out. The next night, we were at a dinner with mutual friends. Emily was radiant, laughing freely, sipping red wine with the same relaxed posture she used to have only on vacations. I watched her from across the table, and for a brief second, I remembered the version of her that used to rehearse elevator pitches in front of our bathroom mirror. When one of the guests asked about Ember, she nodded graciously and gave a practice line about scaling, early traction, and real momentum. She didn't look at me once. At home, she fell asleep with her laptop on the bed. I stayed in the hallway, watching the light on her screen fade to black. Not because I didn't trust her. That trust was already gone. I stayed because I needed to understand the scale. She wasn't just building a startup. She was building a future that didn't include me. And she was doing it with someone who once shook my hand at a networking mixer and said, Man, you're lucky. She's got a fire in her. I'd agreed at the time. Now I realized he wasn't admiring the fire, he was feeding it, and I was standing in the ashes. She left her laptop open. That's how it started, not with a confrontation or some grand discovery, just a moment. A mistake, a quiet lapse in control, the kind that only happens when someone no longer thinks you're paying attention. I'd come upstairs looking for my phone charger. She was in the shower. The bedroom light was still on, the steam already creeping beneath the door. On the bed, her laptop, still glowing. The screensaver hadn't kicked in yet. And there it was, right in the middle of the desktop, Ember_pitch_deck_series A_final. I didn't hesitate. I didn't pace, didn't wrestle with morality. I clicked, because by then, I already knew. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was confirmation chasing form. The first slide bore her name in bold font, Emily Warren, co-founder. Beside it, like a punch in the stomach, Daniel Carter. Same title, same billing. Slide after slide unraveled in front of me. A vision statement filled with corporate poetry and hollow warmth. They talked about disruption, empowerment, sustainable scaling. But none of that held my focus. What stopped me was the tagline on the fifth slide. Fire starts by letting go of what keeps you cold. I stared at it. I'd seen those words before. Not on a website. Not in a pitch deck. In my own handwriting. Inside the anniversary card I gave her on our 3rd year, when she'd been laid off and thought she was breaking apart. I wrote that line for her, trying to remind her of who she was when she forgot. She took that line. Not metaphorically. Literally. And she branded it as her company's identity. Gave it to investors like it came from a journal, from some spark between her and Carter. She didn't just erase me. She rewrote me. She took something sacred and filed it under strategy. I scrolled through the rest. Financial projections, seed capital use, product market alignment. One line tucked into the financial slide made me freeze. Initial capital provided through marital assets, founder contribution, Emily Warren. I sat back in the chair, suddenly very aware of the silence in the room. That wasn't just a betrayal of trust. That was theft. Strategically executed. Legally gray. Ethically rotten. I hit print. Not in anger, but in cold, surgical precision. The printer in the hallway spat out 29 pages. I took them, stacked them neatly, and walked them down to the garage. The drawer where I kept our marriage license, her green card documents, our old tax returns, that's where I filed it. A new chapter in our history, carefully catalogued. Not in rage. In record keeping. That night, she came to bed flushed and giddy. Her skin was still warm from the shower, her hair damp, and she wore the cotton shirt she always reached for when she felt accomplished. I knew the signs. This was victory to her. As she slid under the covers beside me, she spoke with casual excitement. I might be flying to LA in 2 weeks, she said, her voice light but buzzing with suppressed energy. I kept my eyes on the ceiling and asked evenly, "For what?" She propped herself up on one elbow, swirling the wine in her glass before answering. Potential partners. High-level stuff. Nothing signed yet, but Carter thinks it could be huge. Then, as if offering a peace gesture, she extended her glass toward me with a small smile. I looked at it for a moment, then shook my head and said, "No thanks." I asked calmly, "What's the play if it doesn't land?" She shrugged. "It will. But if it doesn't, we pivot. It's early. We're still agile." Her mouth was saying business speak, but her eyes were already rehearsing the panel interviews, the photo spreads, the podcast quotes she'd give about finding her voice. I nodded. Didn't ask anything more. Didn't need to. The next morning, while she was still asleep, I got to work. I contacted our accountant, quietly. I asked for a full audit of every joint account from the past 12 months. I removed my name from anything affiliated with Ember. I opened a new bank account and began transferring funds I could verify were separate property, inheritance, premarital savings, anything untainted. I changed passwords. I rerouted statements. I called my lawyer, scheduled a consult. I wasn't ready to file yet, but I wanted the field mapped out. I wanted to know the terrain before I made the first move, because now it was no longer about suspicion. She'd taken from me, lied to me, rewritten our history and mortgaged our shared future for something I wasn't even allowed to know existed. This wasn't just infidelity, it was exodus, and she didn't think I had the spine to notice. But I noticed everything. She once said I was too careful, too quiet, that I processed everything instead of reacting. She was right. And that was her mistake. It happened on a Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd found the pitch deck. She came home late again. There was no apology, no explanation. Just the scent of wine on her breath and that crisp, rehearsed energy that followed her home these days like perfume. She tossed her coat onto the couch, kicked off her heels, and exhaled dramatically, as if she'd just come back from battle. I was sitting at the kitchen island, folder already on the counter. I didn't speak until she noticed it. "What's that?" she asked, flicking her hair back as she poured a glass of water. No hesitation in her tone. No guilt. "Something I've been meaning to show you," I said. She came over, curious but not yet wary. She opened the folder. The top page, the Ember pitch deck. The same one I'd found on her laptop. The next few, printouts of the LLC registration, bank deposits from joint accounts, the dry cleaning receipt, the flyer with her name circled in red ink. She didn't react immediately, just stared. Then, slowly, she placed the folder back on the counter. Her eyes met mine. "Okay," she said, her voice suddenly low, almost bored. "So you've been spying?" "No," I replied calmly. "I've been reading the fine print." She crossed her arms, the way she always did when she was preparing to argue. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd make this about you. Every time I try to do something for myself, it turns into a guilt trip. I needed space." "You took more than space," I said. "You took my words, my support, my trust. You turned it into a launch pad." Her voice rose slightly. "You never believed in this idea. You said it was risky. I said it was premature. You asked me for advice, I gave it. I didn't say lie. I didn't say siphon money from our accounts," she scoffed. "It was a loan. I would have repaid it. You didn't ask for a loan." She moved to indignation quickly, like it was a suit she kept pressed and ready. "I did what I had to do. I needed Carter. I needed to make decisions fast. You want to talk betrayal? Try watching your own husband treat your ambition like a phase." That's when I slid the card across the counter. The anniversary card. The one with the line she'd stolen. Her eyes dropped to it. When she read the words, her face finally cracked. Her hands clenched slightly, her lips parted. She looked up at me, for real this time. "You wanted to come first," I said, voice even. "So I let you." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence felt like a third presence in the room. Then, without another word, I opened my phone and disabled her access to all our joint accounts. One tap. No drama. I saw it land in her face, not panic, not yet, but awareness. I filed the divorce papers the next morning. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She just packed a bag that evening and said, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond, because the only thing I regretted was not seeing it sooner. It took exactly 16 days. That's how long it took for Ember to begin falling apart, not because of me, but because of something she'd overlooked. Something Carter had buried under charisma and credentials, something Emily hadn't thought to verify. The tip came anonymously, though my lawyer confirmed its origin later. An envelope, postmarked downtown, arrived at the office of a top-tier venture firm that had been circling Ember. Inside was the full pitch deck, printed, annotated, and flagged. A single note highlighted a section of Carter's proprietary framework, with a yellow sticky tab that read, identical to Stratus Group IP. Stratus was Carter's former employer, a powerhouse in strategic branding. Their methodology wasn't just a process, it was protected intellectual property, and Ember had built its foundation on it. Within 48 hours, Ember's lead investor pulled out. A formal inquiry was opened into Carter's compliance violations. The firm's name was quietly removed from Ember's early press materials. Emily's name disappeared next. Officially, she was placed on leave, pending internal review. Unofficially, she was cut out to contain the damage. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Instead, I filed a petition through my attorney asserting that marital funds, mine, had been used to seed Ember's launch without disclosure or consent. It wasn't a public move, just legal, quiet, precise. Within days, the company's lawyers contacted her. Questions she couldn't answer. Signatures she couldn't explain. She texted me that night. "This is spiraling. Can we please just talk?" I didn't reply. Instead, I mailed her a copy of the pitch deck she'd left on her laptop, the one she thought I'd never see. Page 5 was highlighted in red. My line. The one she'd repurposed to sell a future that excluded me. "Fire starts by letting go of what keeps you cold." She claimed it. but I kept the match. The fallout was swift. Her professional reputation, once ascending, began to falter. Friends who had cheered her on from the sidelines started going silent. Invitations dried up. Carter, facing legal heat, distanced himself. No more LA talks, no more panel invites. Meanwhile, I rebuilt, not out of spite, but necessity. I met with my lawyer weekly. We mapped every account, traced every dollar. I pulled equity from investments, and secured my share of the house. I informed our accountant to prepare for an audit. No move was reactive. Every step was calculated. The home we once shared became quiet. Peaceful, in a strange way. Her absence wasn't just physical, it was atmospheric. The air stopped buzzing with unspoken tension.